This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 342 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, and for this episode, we're in the brew house for Bierstadt Lager House. But my guest on the podcast today is Natalie Rose Baldwin, brewmaster for Wayfinder in Portland, Oregon, who just happens to have family out here in Colorado and was making a trip. And so we thought because it was going to be convenient, we should meet up here and have this podcast that we were actually talking about in this same space. But welcome to the podcast, Natalie.
Hi, thanks for meeting me in the brewery here.
Our last meeting was in this same space at their post-GABF party.
Tiki party.
The Tiki party, which was a fun one, definitely. And so it was good to connect there. And I'm sure I pitched you on the idea of doing a podcast, and now it's all coming back together. I say I'm sure because I'm a little foggy on all the details of that night. I think most people are.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley brought out the shambong that night. I don't know if you remember that, but I'm pretty good at chugging champagne, apparently.
Oh, my goodness.
And my little brother was here with us, too.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like this big 6'3" hockey player, and Ashley handed him the shambong, and it was gone in less than 1 second. So, yes, it was a foggy night for all of us.
When I was in Portland last year working on video classes, our Fresh Hop class, our Josh Freem class that's yet to come. So if you're an All Access subscriber, subscribe to the Craft Beer and Brewing All Access tier, get access to our great video classes. The Kevin Davey class that's out there right now on cold IPA. When I was in that Portland, Yakima area, made a point my first day there to swing by Wayfinder, and I specifically asked the beer tender that day, what are the beers? Because it was still in the early days of your Wayfinder beers. Like, what are the beers on your list that Natalie has designed and brewed? And he had 2 beers. And so I was like, I want both of those. And so went out, sought out your beers. Over the years, a couple years ago, I was at the Deacon Pub with Ben Edmonds before one of our Brewery Accelerator events there. He was like, you got to try this beer, these Natalie beers at the Deacon Pub, because you're the R&D brewer for Breakside right before this. And he's been one of your biggest champions. And so we were all excited to see when you took the helm at Wayfinder. Anyway, through this episode, we're going to talk about West Coast, Pacific Northwest Coast pills. I think it's a specific subgenre of West Coast pills as to be differentiated potentially from San Diego, and Southern California iterations of West Coast pills. We'll kind of explore some of that territory.
Yeah.
One of your beers that I had at at Wayfinder at that visit was a Fresh Hop Keller Pils with Strata, which made my own personal top 10 list of favorite beers that I've had this year. And so, for all of those reasons, I'm excited to talk to you about this, in this episode. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. Kevin Troger from Bearded Iris Brewing says G&D Chillers have been a valuable partner throughout our growth. They build high quality equipment and know their machines extremely well. Most importantly, their customer service is best in class, which is a huge value add to our internal teams that manage these critical support systems. End quote. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And turnkey brewing systems, production line design services, retrofitting processing systems. ProBrew can do all of this and more with any brewery, old or new, small or large. With an expansive list of breweries already served, their engineering team prides itself on providing a true turnkey solution built for your entire production line that can be easily customized to fit your operation. For more information, fill out their contact form on www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, Old Orchard has supplied flavored craft juice concentrate blends to over 46 states for the production of fruit-forward beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, and more. By partnering with some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape, Old Orchard has become a go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Natalie, we normally start off the podcast with a little bit of history. Tell us yours. What got you into brewing? And how did your career progress from there?
I got into brewing sort of accidentally and really feel lucky that I've been able to sort of have the opportunities I've had, but also have worked really, really hard to kind of make my way through it. And it's a really fun story, I guess. Sort of simple, but my college job, I was going to school for biochem and was having a hard time keeping up with school and work. And my job during college was I was a valet parker. So I've driven a lot of cars, and I just was having a hard time keeping up with school. So I ended up dropping out and kept my college job and was curious about science still, and was really interested in working in like hair chemistry. And I wanted to go and learn a little bit more about like color theory and, dye and all that kind of stuff. And so I moved to Portland, was going to go to the Paul Mitchell School, got there and just couldn't really pull it off. So I had transferred with my valet job and didn't make any money. So needed to get a second job and started bartending at a brewery and started learning from the brewer there. Thought it was pretty cool. And, similarly to what I was interested in color theory and hair and stuff like that, science and art, as everyone says. I've always been a maker, whether it's sewing or building, or I wish I could draw and paint a little bit better. Not really one of my skills, but I'm just into making things. And, the creative outlet is exciting. And, the same reason you hear a lot of people in the brewing industry. So nothing new there, but I really like it and vibe with some of the creative outlets I have in it. And anyway, I learned to brew at Burnside Brewing in Portland, Oregon, which is now closed, but at the time was pretty cool, similar to Breakside in a lot of ways as far as the aspect of cool food and food-inspired beers and stuff like that. And I was working there. That's kind of where I learned how to do all sorts of tinctures and flower beers and tea beers, and I had a lot of creative freedom, and I just kind of ran with it. And after a couple years there, I was ready to learn a little bit more about, nerd out with Ben Edmonds, basically. I remember
Ben Edmonds yes, the ultimate brewing education under Ben.
Yeah. Kind of built off of that. A handful of years ago, the Oregon Historical Society did a family tree of brewers, which was really cool because, each state or each big brewing region has those big breweries that sort of turn out employees that start their own breweries, whether that was Full Sail and Deschutes and Widmer and, all McMenamins also, and all the family tree roots that went out to some of the smaller breweries. And it's really cool to have been a part of Breakside because I've watched that happen since starting there. And, it's become a pretty cool infrastructure, and left Burnside to work at Breakside, which is confusing. They are different words. I got to, nerd out with Ben and learn a lot. And he curates a really cool team over there. And, I loved Breakside. I loved working there.
And then he got you brewing on that 3.5 barrel tiny system at the Decom Pub, doing R&D under the stairs.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, what a fun
what a
R&D.
cave. Yeah, I mean, when I started at Breakside, I was hired on as a production brewer because I, didn't know a lot about technical aspects of brewing. I got, my feet on the ground and my foot in the door working over at Burnside, but it wasn't quite as technical. And working over at Breakside, it was like, oh, I don't know anything at all. Cool. And, being in the production environment, it was, there's something very fun about being a very good production brewer and, being good with timing and just turning and burning and knowing how to fix stuff. It's very fun. But again, just kind of have always leaned more on the creative side. So when, I don't think bored is the right word. I just sort of needed a creative outlet. And so I started, we were working 410s at the time at Breakside. And on my 3 days off, I worked at a winery during wine harvest. And, just to work 90 hours a week for fun when you're in your early 20s.
Right.
And I can't do that anymore. But that was sort of my creative outlet. And then at the time, the R&D brewer left, and there was a big shift. The Breakside was opening a 10-barrel brewery, and we, had a 30 barrel brewery, a 10 barrel brewery, and a 3 barrel brewery at the time. So it was just kind of who was brewing where, and there never really was a consistent R&D brewer at the Deacon location. It was just a bunch of people rotating through, and I ended up kind of just liking it a lot and getting to know the system really well and having a lot of fun. And definitely not the ideal brewing conditions, but I loved it. So.
And what you were, I remember drinking a lager that you brewed on that tiny little 3.5 barrel system that was rather compelling. Ben was super proud of it, and it's like, you got to try this. And so, you were undertaking some ambitious things even within that kind of small scope. Yeah,
I think that I didn't really know that. I think that I had been in these like bigger brewing environments, especially in production brewing, where, you're not like touching everything the same way, where you brew the beer, QA team does gravities, takes care of everything. And, I had done that at Burnside. But when you switch over to production, it's just a whole different ballgame. And when I had the opportunity to have a little bit of flexible schedule and, not be part of the production beast, I was like, well, this is what it looks like. I'm fine. And it's a funny little brewery underneath the main original Breakside pub, and it's a hot little cave with the glycol chiller in the room. But I've produced a lot of really great award-winning beers on that brewery since Breakside's opened, and I got to be a part of that team, and very proud of that.
It's, every great brewery has some of these like humble origin stories, and you see the first system that Ken Grossman brewed on for Sierra Nevada, and when you see that first system of Breakside, and how Ben was brewing in early days, and that tiny little space, you're like, oh, okay, everyone has earned what they've achieved.
Totally,
and it's amazing to see what that brewery is doing. But then. Kevin Davey decided to hop in with Lisa and start up Gold Dot and join Heater Allen and Wayfinder.
Yeah.
You became brewmaster for Wayfinder.
Yeah. So, I wasn't really looking to leave Breakside because I was very happy and, did a lot of really cool stuff there and felt like a big part of my identity was tied to that. And when Kevin decided to leave Wayfinder, I hadn't really applied to the job initially and then decided to put my hat in the ring and kind of felt like one of the only spots in Portland that was, a good fit for me. And most of my career focused on lager beer and I don't know, not that it was a Wayfinder thing, but just kind of funny little lager beers that weren't necessarily always true to tradition. I like to be nerdy and stick to things when they're supposed to be a very certain way. Isn't lager, but gose is like my baby. I went to Leipzig and 2018 I got Pink Boots scholarship, and on top of the Pink Boots trip, I ended up going to Leipzig because we really focused on making gose, and I ended up a couple years later, having some success at GABF, got gold for the gose that I've been working on. I felt very, very, very proud of that. But point being, whenever we get like a new staff member at Breakside and they'd be like, oh, have you ever thought about putting, I'm like, if you fucking tell me to put fruit in the gose, you're out of here. But yeah, so point being, most of my career is, some things
you choose what you're dogmatic about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I like to get weird. I like to have fun. And the structure of Wayfinder is really cool because there's people know it for lager beer, and that was something that's very close to my heart. And I, kind of wanted to see what the customer allowance and brand allowance was for. I don't want to I think esoteric can have sort of like an egotistical connotation, but to me, when I use that word, I want it to mean more like just a little bit weird and thoughtful and whatever. But yeah, taking over at Wayfinder has been pretty cool.
There's something that is like core edgy about the Wayfinder brand where you expect to push things a little bit and but within some reason, right? It's got to it's not the craziest ingredients, but it does need to be the coolest beer.
Exactly. I like that sounds. But, changing from being a lead at a brewery that has a big team to being the boss at a smaller brewery is a shift. And I felt pretty prepared for all of that, with the skills that I learned at Breakside for, I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 years, but for a hot minute. And ready to take that on, and have been learning a lot in the last year. And, whenever you think you know anything about anything, you are quickly reminded that you don't know shit about shit. And I kind of think that's fun because I don't know, it's fun to learn. And I have, as most people do in the beer industry, the network I have of folks that are willing to like hold me up while I'm in this learning stage has been really incredible. And I don't know, super rewarding and fun and nerdy and hard and brutal, but also, I don't know, all the things. It's been pretty fucking cool.
I think, when people ask me what traits make up those traits of the greatest brewers, it is that constant openness to learning. And it's those brewers. And I will tell you, amongst some of the world's greatest and most award-winning and most highly respected brewers, every time I have conversations with them, they are wanting to learn about things from other younger brewers, from folks that are trying new techniques. And they value that every bit as much as sharing what they know, because we're all contributing to this broader pool of knowledge in the brewing world. And so it is those folks that think they have it all figured out that actually are probably in the worst shape out here. And so obviously that's no one listening to this podcast, because anyone listening to this podcast clearly wants to learn from how other people are doing things. And so we'll use that segue to talk about how you do some of these things in that kind of Pacific Northwest IPA realm, which is of course big for Wayfinder, both in the regular IPA world and in the cold IPA world, which really are just shades of difference for each other these days. And then also, of course, in the the traditional lager space and in the hoppy lager space, both of which where you're choosing your own dogma to explain those. Before we talk about those things, streamline efficiency with Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout series. The DKO series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. The strains now better, available now for made-to-order pitchables at any volume. Contact Omega Yeast today at omegayeast.com. Also, ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brewhouses tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. And are you planning a brewery, considering the purchase of an existing brewery, or are you working in the industry and kicking around the idea of realizing your own brewery vision? If any of these apply, go to breweryworkshop.com right now. Check out our upcoming Brewery Accelerator, March 24th through 27th in Austin, Texas. Some of our favorite award-winning brewers are joining us to help share the knowledge you need, like Marcus Baskerville of Weathered Souls and Joe Moorfeld of Pint House. This will be the only Brewery Accelerator event in 2024. So don't wait. Secure your spot now at breweryworkshop.com. All right, Natalie, where should we start? Do you want to talk about IPA first and then lager?
Sure. You're gonna laugh at me when we talk IPA.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Wayfinder actually, the original cold IPA Relapse was one of our beers of the year years ago.
Yeah.
And so you walk into, an IPA program, a Wayfinder that people have expectations around. How did you take stock of things, and where have you pushed over the last 6 to 8 months since then? Yeah.
So the reason I say you're gonna laugh is because my whole career at Decum and Breakside, I think I would maybe dry hop 1 or 2 beers a year, because I just wasn't making those beers, because Dylan, who after I left, they kind of restructured the R&D program, and he's the boss now of R&D and running that whole program. But anyways, he worked at the Slabtown location, and he made the hoppy beers, and so I just didn't have to. And
plus, if you're going to make hobby beers at Breakside, you're going to sell enough that you need to make more than 3.5 barrels of them.
Exactly. I had bit of success with the reinvention of Woodlawn Pale, which is a longtime Breakside beer, and loved making that. So that was my beer that I dry hopped every year for competitions, and that was about it. And then I started at Wayfinder, and I was like, oh fuck, I have to make IPA. How do you make IPA? And worked at this brewery that is, I mean, Breakside won at World Beer Cup for or JBF for IPA, and I fundamentally understand and know what good hops are and things like that. But it was a little moment for me where I'm like, all right, you gotta get it together. And I've kind of been having like a blast making hoppy beer. And like you said, around cold IPA, folks are excited to make their own cold IPAs, send them over, talk about it, want to make sure there's stuff on draft. And when I came in, there was always the OG cold IPA and would sometimes be an additional cold IPA. And I kind of switched it so that we have rotating cold IPAs. And instead of just always having cold on, that's on during the fall and winter months. And we'll switch over to Jazzwitch and another one over the summer. And I don't know, it's kind of fun to mess around with those and do that. But
I got an email today from this morning from Bart at Pinta in Poland. And he outlined to me how many cold IPAs they now make per year, which is 8. How many cold IPAs are made in the entire country of Poland. And, and so it's funny.
People are excited.
It's fun to watch how this thing that started a Wayfinder just, percolated out into the world and has become a thing. It's pretty cool. But then it creates this weight of expectation for you all, because when people come back to Wayfinder, I mean, you have to deliver something for them.
And when you talk to a lot of different folks around the US, and I haven't had as many international conversations, but there's people that have been making hoppy beer, especially West Coast IPA, with 3470 lager yeast for a long time. Sure. And one of my buds, Jake at Westbound and Down here in town, makes really incredible beers that he calls West Coast IPA that aren't necessarily labeled as cold IPA. So there's a lot of really cool stuff people are doing.
Highland Park's doing the same.
Exactly, for a long time.
A lot of Southern California brewers now doing the same.
Mm-hmm. And whichever way you want to call the beer, it's exciting when people are excited about innovation, and innovation is something that's super close to my heart. So I love that. And then for West Coast IPA, I kind of, there's some other things. So like,
do you now vary the yeast between cold IPA and West Coast IPA, or do you now also use lager yeast for your West Coast IPAs and simply change the grain bill so that it's not that adjunct focus?
I've done a little bit of both. Right now, just because of hustle bustle, I've been using some ale yeast for our West Coast IPA. We have talked about kind of switching that to 3472, but it's a little bit more of, I need more yeast to be able to do that. And it's easy to get
Can't you just prop it up with, your lagers? Come on.
Yeah, right. Then we need it for lagers. But so my approach to West Coast IPA, and again, a funny part is, you're as far along in your career as I am, 10 years in, and pretty established. And a lot of these things I haven't done before because I didn't have to, working at a big company. So this year was my first year doing hop selection. One of the reasons was because when hop selection happened and I was offered the opportunity at Breakside, I was doing wine harvest. And so I wasn't able to do hop selection. And, I've participated in conversations around it and knew extensively about our hop lots and things like that, but I had never done that by myself. So this year was my first year, and we're a smaller brewery, so hop selection isn't necessarily the most accessible thing. And YCH had a really cool open door project this year that allowed some smaller breweries to come in and do hop selection on sort of excess hops that weren't contracted for. And it's nerve-wracking to do that for the first time by yourself. And we have a small team and we're busy and weren't able to send more people up this year. So it was me by myself selecting hops. And I'm like, well, hopefully I know how to do this. And I've learned a lot. My best friend, Sam, works at Von Ebert, and he's sort of been my steward through a lot of the hop stuff because that's one of his big passion projects. And, we talked through the hop contracts that we have at Wayfinder and sort of which ways I wanted to move things and adjust. And when I didn't really know what our West Coast IPA was going to be, because I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I didn't really know what to contract, and working with my suppliers and all that kind of stuff has been a really fun learning curve for me, honestly. And so that's kind of my approach to West Coast IPA, is getting down and learning more about my raw materials and picking and choosing. Our West Coast flagship right now is called Winged Creatures, and it's Old Faithful. It's the exact opposite what Kevin says in his cold IPA lecture. Like, don't do Citrus Simcoe Mosaic, but guess what, Kevy?
Yes. The truth comes out. It does work.
We're making a really cool beer, and then we can kind of branch off of that. And, we're a newer team together and making dope beer. And, one of the...
So now as you get into making West Coast IPA and having to wrap your, all of these ingredients, hops into it, talk about your creative process. What does that look like? And I love that you come out of this like creative meets science background. And so, there's a little bit of that alchemy that has to take place in there. How do you start thinking about flavors and ingredients? And, do you start with what you want somebody to taste like, work back from it? Do you start with the ingredients themselves and think about where you can take these and what's possible from them? How does that creative process work for you?
I think it's a little bit of both. Specifically with Winged Creatures, I am a big fan of crowdsourcing and gathering information. Like, I just want to know, even if I'm cooking something at home, I'm going to read 17 recipes and pick which things that I think sound good. And, when designing that, I know how Breakside makes IPA. I know how Sam makes at Von Ebert makes IPA. And I talked a lot with Jake from Westbound and Down just to kind of like switch it up a little bit and learn some really cool techniques with some, maybe non-traditional ways to use hop extracts and things like that. So my creative process sort of starts with an end goal of maybe a flavor profile, and then building the recipe around it. Or sometimes it'll be like one ingredient, be like, I know that I want to use this super dank mosaic and the dry hop, and then what other things around it should I build? In West Coast IPA, I like a lot of the like tropical dank, not necessarily pineapple tropical, but getting more in the like guava, passion fruit, that whole realm. So I don't know, just kind of picking what I want to end up with and building hops around that. And
there's a slightly danker element generally to those, Portland, Pacific Northwest IPAs, maybe a little more so than the Southern California iterations of those.
Yep. And I think that traditionally the bitterness has been elevated, but I think a lot of folks have, a lot of folks have been sort
Keep
of
IPA bitter. Come on.
Eliminating that, though. Like, even Breakside IPA over the last handful of years has changed pretty, same but different.
Right,
and I think that I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want. I like assertive bitterness, but I don't like resiny IPAs. So like, how do you make something that's not too juicy, jammy, but has enough structure in it? And I've been getting down with that. I feel like, switch a little bit over with West Coast pills and let's just go even in a whole other direction. Something that I've been sort of fixated on, especially as like a lager brewer, what are we going to do with these hops that are being feisty coming from Europe? And what ways can you have American hops taste cool in a lager beer, whether it's inauthentic or not? Like, what are we going to do? And, the beer that you mentioned you tried at Wayfinder that was on your list this year, which was a very, very cool thing for me. Also, before we even talk about that, how did you said you were in there in town and you tried those beers, and like when you're making the list, that your favorite beers of the year, like what about that beer was exciting for you, or what made it? So
I'm going to pull up my phone here. I taste a lot of beers, a couple thousand in any given year. Some I write reviews of for the magazine. Some I'm just tasting out and about. Some hit me in certain ways. And when something really hits me, I just stop and like pull up my notes on my phone. And then I just start writing about it, because it's like, this is something that I want to, keep more notes on.
Yeah.
I check everything into Untapped that, I try to, just so I can always keep a record of it. They have it's a great database. I don't score anything because that's super lame, and nobody in the brewing industry should ever be scoring things themselves on Untapped. But I digress. I use it just so because I can always keep track of what I've had.
It's your library.
Yeah, right. It's just a quick database that shows me what I have, and I can go back. I also do that. I pull down that spreadsheet at the end of every year, kind of go through, remember those beers that I had them, where I had them. And it's like, oh, that's another part of my method. But there was a moment where I was sitting at the Silver Stamp last fall and had some Tilquin Goose, draft goose, and I was like, this watermelon character is something I've never tasted out of Tilquin Goose, and
briny.
A little bit, but it just had that kind of cucumber watermelon character to it that just felt so bright and so refreshing. And we're in hot ass Las Vegas. And the Silver Stamp is amazing. What a killer beer bar. But all those things, I went back. I never do this, but I went back the next night just to go drink that beer on draft again at the same bar. I love
when that happens. It's such a wonderful feeling because you just you're like, was it as good as I thought it was? And then when it is, you're like, man, nice.
I did. I went back the next night. And of course, Dan from Milk the Funk was there, and Matt from Able Baker. And so actually ended up hanging out with them, and all these random kind of connections. It was really fun. But I made those notes, and, and I did the same thing, for Wayfinder.
Cool.
It tastes like, there's something about this. And I think the thing that struck me is that, there's this, grassy-ish character to European Pilsner, which it should be there. And there was something about the idea of the fresh hop flavor that worked really well in that context, that didn't fight against that kind of, core, grassy character. And that grassy character is malt as much as hops, and that together it worked really well. And and then the kind of restraint and subtleness of that kind of strata peachy note to it just didn't need to be over the top. It just needed to hover in there and kind of soften and make things really pleasant to drink. Anyway, it struck me, and so I like I said, I don't normally I've made notes for about 8 or 10 beers this year, and that was or last year. So that was one of them, and that's how it ended up on my list. That was what you were hoping to get out of listening to our Critics List episode of the podcast, but then I didn't share my list.
I mean, I heard a lot of really great stories, but I was like, this guy. Yeah. So the reason I ask is to sort of answer your question again about process. So that beer was my whole idea was I wanted fresh hop strata to taste like pink, not like stank. And how do you do that? What do you do? Do you need a little bit higher alcohol? Do you need a little bit more malt sweetness? Like, what do you do? And again, this is part of messing around with lager beer and American hops. And what's interesting is that a West Coast Pils, not necessarily like what can you do? What's cool? What smells good? What tastes good? What is, I don't know. I like to mess around. And this is sort of that like esoteric zone where like get a little bit weird, but not too weird. And my style in general is like delicate, light-handed.
Well, what was the process that you used? Because obviously the peach notes in there hit that pink quality for me.
Yeah.
What was it? There are lots of different processes for making fresh hop beers. We have tried to catalog every single one of them. The Breakside approach is very different than the Single Hill approach or the varietal approach, the Fremont approach. And so, there's lots of ways to make really killer fresh hop beer. I love the idea of making a fresh hop lager and not just a fresh hop IPA or pale ale. How did you capture that character? Some of that grassy, hoppy, vegetal character, grassy character, but then also some of those softer, fruity notes.
So a handful of years ago at Breakside, I made a fresh hop Sterling Pils, and it was a Keller Pils also. And it was, maybe a little bit more Kellery than folks want Keller beer to be. It had a little bit of yeast veil to it. And something about that, like lager yeast with the fresh hop oils just has this like really pretty like watermelon green, grassy, but like bright and not like bitter. And I just really liked that. So this year or last year, I wanted to make a Keller Pils to sort of accentuate that, but I wanted to use Strata instead of something like Sterling because I wanted to get that pink. So what we did was made a little bit higher alcohol Pilsner, and I can't remember how I hopped it in the kettle. I think that I kept the BUs fairly low, around 20, with a small charge of Strata T90 in the Whirlpool. And the goal was to actually get a decent yield out of a fresh hop Pilsner with hops added cold side that were frozen. That's how I learned how to do fresh hop.
That's definitely
processing.
the Breakside method, right?
Yeah.
Cold side, fresh hop steep.
Yep, cold side, fresh hop steep after you've fractured the flowers after freezing them with nitrogen. And, that's kind of how I know how to do it. And I know that you have a lot of loss because a lot of beer gets stuck in the hops in the bright tank. So the goal was to, make it a little bit higher gravity, add some deaerated water to bring that gravity back down into like Pilsner zone. But something that we always talked about was artifacts of fermentation. Like when you do those higher gravity brews, whether you're diluting it with water or whatever later on, what are you getting from that higher alcohol fermentation? You get a little bit of glycerol and mouthfeel and aroma and texture, just all these different things. And I was like, so what about with like lager beer, with a pale lager beer? Yeah. So I think some of that, like a little bit of Strata in the Whirlpool, a little bit of malt sweetness. And then the beer sat on those frozen fresh hops for, I think, 2 days. And we tried to get the earliest pick Strata so it wasn't super stinky, and worked with Brad over at Crosby, and he was super great about making sure that we got the type of Strata that we wanted, and ended up being a little bit later than I was expecting.
An hour away from you too, so it's a pretty quick, quick drive to get them there. Yeah.
Woke up at 6, picked up Jose, one of our brewers, and Jose has been in the brewing industry for a long time and worked at Green Flash before moving up to Portland, and worked around hops his whole career. Never been to a hop field, so we got to go out there, pick them, and put them in the van, and bring them back and put them in the beer, and the full romance of Pacific Northwest fresh hop brewing. But yeah, the main goal of the beer was just to keep it pink, and I didn't know if it was going to work or not, and it ended up not being too dank. And whether that was by the decisions we made or the luck of the hop gods, you tell me. But yeah, just some kind of cool approaches.
How do you freeze them with nitrogen then? You're doing that yourself.
Yeah, we did that ourselves. There are a lot of really cool products. I made
it's just a quick freeze process.
Quick freeze with liquid nitrogen, crush them, put them in a hot bag, throw them in the tank.
And that doesn't, it doesn't create more distracting kind of polyphenol characters. I mean,
I guess not.
It's interesting to me. I mean, because you think that one of the benefits of that kind of whole cone steep of a fresh hop is that it's not pulling some of the crazier, less desirable characters out of it. But when you break things open like that, I don't know. That's interesting.
And you have more contact, and you're not.
Yeah. What kind of concentrate or what kind of volume of fresh hops are you using? Or
dang, let's see if I can pull this out of my brain. I did go lower volume. I think that I did. I'm trying to remember how much a box of hops weighs. Whatever. Those of you who know, it was 2 boxes of cones. So I don't know if that was 20 pounds or 40 pounds or something like that. It was like a 20 barrel brew, and we diluted it up to like 25 barrels or something like that.
So that's a pretty subtle fresh hop
just a
addition
kiss.
There. Yeah. Amplified by a little bit of Whirlpool T90 too.
Yep. I think it was like 2 pounds in a 10 barrel batch. So just barely. And to kind of build off that, we were having fun, and I wanted to make a West Coast Pils, and Crosby was doing a project where they were freezing fresh flowers and then putting them through their CGX line. And they didn't, since it was a project, they didn't pelletize them. They just had powder. So we were part of a trial program, and we made a West Coast Pils that was some German hops hot side, and then American hops dry hopped, and included in the dry hop was the Strata CGX fresh hop powder.
Ooh.
And ended up being...
Were they nitrogenize and then, pelletize for you, huh? Or not pelletize, but powderize.
Exactly. So instead of doing that last step to pellets, it was just that powder, which is funny. Because we're like, all right, so what do we do? How do we get this powder into the tank? And we ended up... The product didn't smell as good as I wanted it to cold, but in the beer, it smelled great. And we won our first medal together at Wayfinder as a team. And I brought you the fresh hop version. Is called Altered State because it's hard to name beers and whatever, but this is dope West Coast pills, and we just made a non-fresh hop version of it with the Strata CGX, just their regular not fresh hop, and from Crosby, and tastes pretty cool. There's this cool like pink, like we were talking about early. It has some mosaic in there too. So a little bit of dank, a little bit of pink. And at the end has this like guava passion fruit like pickup. And I don't know. It's a cool beer. And I've been, like I said, I've been having a lot of fun doing projects with hop suppliers and messing around with hoppy beer.
It's interesting to hear that approach to building this kind of West Coast Pilsner versus some of the Southern California approach, which tends to be maybe a little bit more Citra driven. I just want to, let's parse some of that out here in a bit. But first, SS Brewtech was founded by a group of homebrewers and craft beer brewers dedicated to bringing an engineering first approach to brewery equipment. SS brewhouses are used to formulate new beer recipes at some of the world's greatest breweries and are the cornerstone of many local breweries. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, have you heard of Christian Hansen? They're the fermentation experts with over 100 years of experience in dairy and wine. They're now bringing that knowledge of microbes to brewers with their Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria. This portfolio allows for consistent performance at the brewery and produces a range of high-quality brews. Reimagine what your beer can be. Go to chr-hansen, HANSEN.com to learn more on the Smart Bev line of products. I'm curious about this. So, you've continued on this West Coast Pilsner brand, but it also seems to make sense to work Strata into this, given that it's an Oregon hop, given that you're so close to it. I mean, there's almost a local and a regional story to it, in addition to the flavors that make these beers your own, rather than just carbon copies of Southern California iteration on West Coast Pils.
Yeah, I think that, we built the West Coast. I made a couple since I've been at Wayfinder, but we built the fresh hop West Coast Pilled Altered State Pills. West Coast Pills Altered State around the CGX product. And when we were remaking it, I'm like, is there anything that we can do to replicate that flavor? Probably not, but the closest we could get to some of the positive, sweet, juicy components would be a concentrated nitrogen pellet, which is why we chose that Strata CGX hop. And yeah, like you said, we started from maybe not necessarily an end goal, but more to see what something could do and what it could be. And when we liked that, sort of building the beer around it with accessible ingredients, which you don't necessarily have all year, right? And I know a lot of hop producers and suppliers are trying to figure out ways to get people fresh hops who aren't in the Pacific Northwest. And I've done some projects with YCH at Breakside for their like 301 frozen fresh hop pellets too. And I don't know. Sometimes it's fun to build stuff around an ingredient, not always, because, we're trying to be consistent. But that was a particular cool approach. And
what are some of the other West Coast Pilsner approaches that you've taken?
Again, pulling things from my brain. If you ask me what's in any of my recipes, I'm like, I don't know. I have to look because it's an empty hallway in there. But I made a beer with Sam from Von Ebert, and we went with like Southern Hemisphere because I really, like I talked about earlier, I kind of like that Venice white grape, peachy passion fruit type thing. And we were just kind of messing around with beer, and I think we did like Mosaic Cryo, Citra Cryo, and then some like Rawaka to get some of that passion fruit. And we went a little bit heavier on, sort of pounds per barrel West Coast IPA, hot side with lager yeast, fermented warmer than our traditional lagers, but colder than a cold IPA. So, I think we knocked out at like 52F and kept it there and then did a temp ramp to like 57 or something like that. And it was a little bit more like West Coast IPA with a Pilsner with with like lager fermentation. And, I think that we also filtered that beer because, I didn't have a filter at Breakside, but we find beers. And so I was sort of figuring out, like, do I want to filter these beers? Do I want to find these beers? What makes everything stay intact? And I felt like that first one we did filtering the West Coast pills sort of stripped some of the sulfur that I wanted around. And it still smelled and tasted great, but it was a little bit brighter pre-filter. So now we just lightly fine those and don't filter them. So that's something that I've learned and liked quite a bit. But that's my
fun.
only.
You don't want to lose the sulfur. I love that nice little sulfur, and I think that's what I love about a lot of Southern Hemisphere hops is that they have those adjacent compounds that, and I find that they end up like I ended up describing them as like linen or even like white floral or fresh, just fresh. They have this almost like water on a white flower bud kind of after a rain, kind of a little bit of petrichor and a little bit of that just fresh floral element to them.
And a lot of the things I do, I call it like witchy brewing, where I could read about it and I could tell you why, but sometimes I just like having a feeling about it, which drives some people crazy. But like for me, the idea is in my head, the way that it looks is like, picture like a little cloud of hops in your beer. And then when that gets kind of like diminished a little bit, maybe like when you're smelling it, that little cloud isn't getting puffed in your face when you drink it. And I don't know, just those stripping some of those sulfur compounds out just took out some of the intensity that we were smelling before that. And, trialing it the other way, at least with the hops we were using, worked really well for us. And we've liked that.
That's interesting. It's almost like salt in that regard, right? Like it's not that it needs to be the flavor, but it also can bring out the definition and other flavors and other aromas.
Yeah, I think so. Or at least that's what we've been experiencing. So
cool. Are there other hops or do you, you're using the same kind of West Coast Pilsner base for this, or do you vary your malt based on, the kind of hop intensity and direction of these things?
I am using a little bit less characterful malt for the West Coast pills. So I'm not using something like sweet and characterful like Byerman pills. We've been using a couple different things. We just recently switched to Canada Malting Superior pills. I like that quite a bit. Super pale, dry, not inert, but not loud and not sweet and doughy. And have done some like raw premium pills and stuff like that. But I'm leaning a lot more towards those like American, straightforward, less characterful malts and simple step mash. Again, I have to look at things to remember, but
more and more movement to domestic malt wherever, given all the economic concerns on that.
I mean, we've had some really positive, like the beers taste good. So it's not even just to, obviously we're paying attention to our impact on the world by importing things. And I mean, still use a lot of continental hops and grown malt and things like that. But yeah, I've had a lot of success with those malts and they taste good.
Sure. What do you use, those more characterful malts in?
I definitely will use some more characterful malt in beers that I want to be a little bit more driven by malt. I mean, not to be too simple, but like my little baby at Wayfinder, my first beer, and kind of the thing that I've been running with is French pills. Again, with my like esoteric vibes is we've been, not that French pills is a made up style, but it's not a made up style, right? Like, I like to make up beer styles, not to be, I don't know.
Alsatian sounds so much more lyrical and romantic, but no,
It does, but like we all know if people can't order something off the menu, it's not going to sell.
French bills, right?
Yeah. People are like, oh, I know what French is.
I love how, in America, if you name something Italian, oh, that sounds interesting. It sounds romantic,
so exotic.
Yeah, and I say that because I grew up on a street called Tuscany.
Yeah,
Tuscany Place.
Wow, you're so cultured,
right? But if you look at like subdivisions in America, like how many? There's just shitloads of subdivisions in America, like filled with like similar tract homes.
Yep.
All named after Italian roads, Italian towns, and and so here we are trying to evoke these ideas of this romanticism on even some of the most mundane things.
Again, we're having fun. For me, it's like,
so these work. We love to be snarky and cynical about using these terms, but it's not like it's only unique to the beer industry. This is just a broader,
Yeah, I think for me, it's we made a rose petal pilsner last year called Midsommar, and we released it on the summer solstice, my favorite day of the year. And I'm just having fun. What do we call a summer pils? What's a summer pils? You tell me. Fun. We're about to make a batch 666. Hell yeah, brother. Lager, and we're calling it a sparkling lager. What is that? I don't know. It's fun. I like it. But anyways, French pills, I know some other folks are making that, but in my head, what it means is a little bit rustic. At the time I couldn't really get Franco-Belge. Is that how we're saying this?
Sure.
I couldn't really get French, base malt, but I was able to get Dingemans or Castle at the time and use Castle pills. So, a neighbor, doing my best. And Strisselspalt is my favorite hop. And I really love that it tastes the way that rose petals and black pepper tastes. And when you add rose petals to beer, they taste like sort of black pepper and floral. So to me, Strisselspalt tastes like rose petals and rose petals taste like Strisselspalt. And spelt is one of my favorites. So, kind of getting this more characterful, sweet, doughy Pilsner malt, and then adding a little bit of sweet, spicy, bodybuilding, heirloom wheat. And it's kind of funny because I'm like building up the beer to make it dry. So I have all these like characterful things, but stepping and mash out decoction, doing things that I think are creating a drier beer, but also still having some, again, malt artifacts around and mineral forward, hoppy bitter, but still on that like floral black pepper range. And I don't know, just again, having fun. The first batch was one that I was figuring out how to make at the brewery. So it was kind of like alpine strawberries and whatever. And then I learned that if you add magnesium to a beer that is getting decocted, you can pick up more melanoidin. And so the beer was like a little bit sweeter and darker than I was expecting. And then the next batch kept everything the same and took the magnesium out, and the beer was like more pale and didn't have as much color pickup. So learning on the way here. And that the second batch and there throughout was a little bit more on brand of what I wanted, that like whatever you think rustic is, little bit rustic and a little bit fun. We do filter it, so it's not as rustic as it could be, but that was my idea for that. So that would be a beer that uses a little bit more characterful malt, and traditional German beers and traditional Czech beers, we're using a lot of true to style malts. Sure. We just made this beer, one of my favorite labels. It looks like a cabinet of curiosities. It's very beautiful. But it's called Keepsake. It's a Vienna lager. And like if you were to put this in a competition, I don't know that it would fit to the style very well as a Vienna lager. It's 50-50 Pilsner and Bayerman Vienna malt, and then a bag of a caramel Vienna, half a bag of caramel Vienna, just as a little bit. And it's pretty pale, and has a little bit of tet in it. And I don't know, it's like that sweet, perfumey Vienna malt, but it's not super, doesn't sit on your tongue for super long, and then just a little bit of tet. So it's, I don't know, this is probably one of my favorite beers that we've made in a little while. And it's just, somehow exists without being too loud and just has enough character. I'm excited for you when you get to try it, because it's a cool little beer.
Sounds great. I wasn't planning on talking to you about it, but you mentioned gose earlier as being this dogmatic style that you love to focus on. It's certainly not something that we talk about much here on the podcast, but I feel like I would be missing the opportunity to dive into you nerding out on the subject of gose. And so, talk to me about what you've learned in brewing gose, but also visiting Leipzig and, doing more of that kind of background work on understanding how to brew that beer.
Yeah. So I remember when I was like an itty bitty baby brewer and Tanya Cornett came out with German Sparkle Party, which is a Berliner Weisse. And I was like, this is so cool. And I remember Whitney was opening the Portland 10 barrel location and Tanya was at the opening and she was like, I'll introduce you to Tanya. And I was like, oh my God. And now Tanya is one of my good friends and, GABF roommates. And we're actually speaking at CBC together this year. And anyways,
Tanya is amazing.
The ultimate.
Just amazing.
Talk about people who always want to learn and are willing to do anything to make their beer better. She is incredible. And if you've never had a conversation with her about how she continues to improve beers every single time she makes them, you could learn a lot from her. She's great.
She intimidated me when we did that podcast 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. And I've never had someone show up to first. We didn't have a lot of. We went through
Was she so prepared?
I went through a PR person, and so I wasn't exactly sure that she even knew what was going to happen.
Yeah,
and I was a little afraid that it might not even happen. I drove all the way to Bend just for that podcast because I'm insane, by the way.
We like to have fun.
And she showed up with 5 pages of notes.
Yeah, that's how she is.
I've never seen anyone that prepared for a podcast before.
Yeah, she's like that in everything.
But this is why she just perennially wins medals everywhere in every competition in these styles.
Yeah. And, working alongside her and Ben for a long time is one of the reasons or one of the ways I learned how to record data and pay attention and really absorb the things that are going on with you or going on around you in food and just experience overall. And, anyways, side rant, but, Tanya was making German Sparkle Party. And then when she started working with Ian, they make a Berliner called Bay Window. And, I just was really fascinated with their lacto culture. And, you have some around town with folks that are maybe a little bit less experienced. And there's lots of weird sulfur and perm and rubber and all sorts of strange things. And so I really wanted to make a beer that's in that low alcohol range. And I don't know what my deal is with wheat, I'm realizing as we're talking about this, but I just really love something that is so dry and so attentive to acid and, still has, something going on. It's not just dry. It doesn't hurt your teeth. Maybe this was part of when mixed culture beer was really having a surge in the US. And I just felt like the Berliners and Goses were a little bit more approachable. And, I really love the whole briny, savory aspect of Gose. I just think it's so cool, especially when it's well balanced with that lemony, limey, sometimes a little bit like tangerine passion fruit thing that you can get from really nice coriander. And Breakside makes this beer called Passion Fruit Sour, and there's a 90 barrel sour wort tank in the brewery. And there's a heating element that keeps that lactose strain warm and ready to go all year. So, it was really, really easy for me to approach any sour beer because I had this strain at my full disposal. So my project one year is I wanted to make a gose, and I really loved the Reuben's gose at the time as like an American interpretation where it's just like brewer's Gatorade. You can just crush that all day. It's so just so pretty. And I made the first batch and we entered North American Beer Awards, and the Reuben's Gose got gold and the Breakside Gose got silver. And I was like, oh, fuck, I think I kind of did it. And that was a really cool moment for me in my career, when you have your shit together enough where you can like actually do the thing that you're trying to do. And, not saying that I hadn't been doing that for a long time, but that particularly was like a cool goal for me. But anyway.
How do you build the recipe?
A lot of it was around figuring out the like TA and pH of our house lactose strain. So figuring out different ways to have healthy fermentations without negative sulfur, or, another thing is that like cold THP little beast, right? Like sometimes with those quick sours, all sorts of weird stuff happens. And like the strain at Breakside specifically had it fermented out. So like when you ferment it, or when you kettle soured it, once the pH and TA was in range, there was an alcoholic fermentation happening. So when you boil the beer, you're boiling under 210 and boiling off a lot of the alcohol. So then you have this like lower alcohol fermentation, which sometimes kicks off a whole other different kind of sulfur. So, getting to know different like yeast adaptations and things like that we were doing to create this really healthy fermentation was probably like the biggest focus. But the way that we designed the recipe was, if our TA and pH were going to get as low as we wanted them to be, what do we do to make sure that the beer is not too dry? Because if you go to Leipzig, that beer is like golden orange and malty and sweet, and not necessarily the way that the American interpretation is. Where ours is a little bit more, lemon lime, pale yellow, with a wheat veil to it. And so, being authentic to having malt character without being too dry. So, a little mix of a couple different types of wheats, not kettle finding it.
Are there specific wheats that you lean on them for that, or add to it?
Combination of flaked wheat and what is regular wheat called? Regular wheat?
Sure. Malted
wheat. Nice. There we go. Was there unmalted wheat in it? I don't remember. I believe that we had 3 different kinds of wheat in there in different proportions, not trying to get too weird, but making sure that nothing was tasting like Play-Doh-y and gummy-y, but also had enough wheat in there so that you still had that little wheat veil, because I think that my favorite versions of the beer did have that slight wheat haze to it. And when it got a little bit too clear, the body just didn't match the way that I wanted it to be. And, a big part of it was coriander selection, honestly, getting to know different corianders and when to add it. And definitely learned a lot. Found some really great Ukrainian coriander. Also liked Indian coriander quite a bit. Those are like my 2 favorites, especially like we had one Indian coriander that we liked quite a bit that was very hard to source. And as you imagine, Ukrainian coriander isn't super easy to source anymore, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons. But part of innovation and R&D, right?
Sure.
Sustainability of ingredients. And sometimes you have to pivot and beer styles change a little bit because of availability. And
do you remember TAPH goals for the finished beer?
I don't remember that. I'm so sorry for everyone who just listens to my memory, my lack of memory. I'm a referencer. I have to look at things or else it doesn't exist.
And then the salt component to that. I mean, especially with gose, salt's a big piece of it. There's standard sodium chloride, but the intensity of that, if you're American, and you tell someone salt's in the beer, you want to put a shitload of salt in the beer. Yeah. But some subtlety to it would probably, be more in line with the original. How did you balance that? And was there salt that you leaned on that gave you the kind of flavor you're looking for?
You're all going to not believe this, but I think I remember something. In that like 3-barrel batch, we were using I think it was like 125 grams of just sea salt. And I know people kind of mess around with some fancier salts, and we had done some trials, I believe previous to me, that Ben had done with sea salt, and just didn't really notice a big difference on like fancier necessarily or flavored salts and things like that. So we just kind of used a bulk sea salt, and it obviously adds a lot of weight to the beer, and you're balancing you don't want to make it like briny necessarily, but I like to describe it as sort of the way sea breeze smells, where it's salty, but it's not like going to kick you in the face or hurt your teeth or anything like that. So not too much in order to avoid weight, but enough to make it noticeable.
Sure. How did the Germans mash that, and how did you mash it?
The mash?
Yeah.
We did a little step mash, and mostly because I'm stubborn and refuse to use rice hulls. And so again, since I'm not a Breakside anymore, I haven't seen that recipe in a little while. So I don't remember all the way, but I think it was just probably 3 steps, 132, 144, 158 or something like that. And just a careful beginning of lauter. And just try to not stick that mash with, I believe it's over 50% wheat. Again, who knows though?
Yeah. And then alcoholic fermentation after the mash.
Yep. We just used 001 Chico yeast and 66 knockouts, 68 set the tank, leave it and chill. Yeah. Did do some, adaptations for the yeast so that they were prepared to ferment in a low pH environment. And that was something that was super helpful for us.
When you say adaptations, what do you mean? Did you condition this on a more acidic beer before you pitched it, or?
Yeah, I would do take my yeast pitch, some dextrose solution along with some sour beer, and put that in the tank. Often it was a bit of the previous batch of gose or just sterilized sour wort, put that in the tank, and then fermented that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously those bottling sour beer are also now preconditioning and acidifying their bottling yeast for the same kind of reason to make
That's
sure.
what we got the idea from. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, makes sense. Did you close the tank at the end of fermentation for any of the natural carbonation, or it was just post fermentation carbonation?
Breakside. So, whenever someone wins a award from the Deacon Brewery, unless it's a lager beer, everything has been carved in a keg. But
carved in a keg.
Carved in a keg,
wow.
racked flat and carved in a keg with head pressure.
Huh.
Because those tanks don't have carb stones.
Okay.
There's only a Zwickel port on them, and there's no bright
force
tank.
carved in a keg.
Force carved in a keg.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know. I think when you feel like you don't have all the tools, sometimes it's really frustrating, but you can make world-class beer as a professional brewer in a lot of different ways, and don't limit yourself, because you can carb beer in a keg. It's going to be fine. Obviously, there's ways that
you can win gold medals for beer carved in a keg. Yeah, apparently.
And, there's parts of us that, when I listen to Ashley talk, or some of my other friends that I respect a lot in the beer industry, there's ways that we want to do beer, and there's ways that those are our standards and we are only going to do it these ways. But sometimes you are doing your stepping stones so that you can get there, whether that's a financial barrier, equipment barrier, whatever it is. You can make excellent beer if you hold high standards and make sure that you are doing everything in the most excellent, nitpicky way as you're going through it with the tools that you have.
There's different ways to be excellent and nitpicky, and that multiplicity of methods of being nitpicky. And even if you do things different than Ashley, you can still be friends. Yeah.
Oh, we're never rid of each other. We're good friends.
Well, we appreciate them giving us space here. Let's zoom out. Let's talk about, big picture. What's next for you? What do you hope over the next year or two in Wayfinder to dig into and explore?
Just kind of building off the stuff that we've been talking about. I'm almost at 1 year at Wayfinder, and I've been, learning so much about what I fundamentally want out of a team that I'm working with and out of a brand, and, whether that's our sales team, our brewery team, whatever, I don't know. It's just so cool to be able to grow that. And like we were talking about earlier, whether you are the most seasoned brewer with access to every single class or equipment or whatever it is, some of my team is Mike is pretty new. He just moved from Georgia to work with us from Monday night. He's just kind of washing kegs and was moving up here with his wife, and he is washing kegs and kegging beer, and we'll write an SOP to have him work on something, and he's like, hey, I did this and I think that there's a better way to do it. And it doesn't matter how green you are, but I love working on a team that wants to have conversations, and, it's a positive environment. So if you want to make a change, it's not no one's cutting you down. It's trying really hard to create an environment that we can all learn from each other and challenge I think sometimes has a negative connotation, but work and grow together. And I think that we're just going to continue to make better and better beer because we are asking all the questions and doing all the things. So, like I was talking about earlier, making up beer styles, making that sparkling lager that we're brewing. It's a 50-50 American malt and American Pils and environment pills with I've never added dextrose to a lager before, but my goal is to make this just like super dry and super sparkly. It might be gross, but I'm going to try. And then it's kind of a little bit of sots, first wort, 30-minute, 10-minute. I don't know what's going to happen. It's
going to be a higher carbonation.
Higher carbonation, as high as we can get it.
Yeah.
Mobile canning, don't hate me.
Make some bottled versions that somebody kegs.
We'll
just so you can get it as high as you really want it.
We'll probably put some in glass bottles to sit and wait for later. But I don't know. I'm just having a lot of fun stretching those limits of things that I think are exciting. And we've made a chamomile beer, a rose beer this year, and it's been really fun to sort of have our customer base really accept the wild ways that we're messing with lager, mostly because they're excited about lager beer. And we do make a lot of things that are very true to style, like our German Pils and our Helles. I feel very proud of that. We're working really hard to get that into the most authentic version of itself and the way that we want to brew it. But I don't know. We're just having fun, and I'm messing around with American hops and lagers like we talked about earlier, and just really trying my best to stay excited. And I think that after being an innovation for so many years, there's a lot of different points where you feel really crippled by need to be innovative and creative. And right now I've been just feeling really inspired and really creative, and kind of running with that while I have it.
And you have some guardrails, to work in to give some structure to everything also. And some of all that.
Or like lager ethics, right? Like we're not going to do anything gross and not going to do anything. Sorry, I shouldn't say gross. We're not going to do anything that wouldn't, we're going to use good quality ingredients and healthy fermentation and our best decision-making processes along the way. We're trying to make really fucking good beer.
Well, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew's engineering team prides itself on providing true customized turnkey solutions. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. ABS Commercial are proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country. Secure your brewery accelerator spot right now at breweryworkshop.com. SS Brewtech is dedicated to an engineering-first approach to brewery equipment and powers R&D at some of the world's greatest breweries. Christian Hansen's Smart Bev range of frozen liquid yeast and freeze-dried bacteria allow for consistent performance and high quality. If you've enjoyed this episode, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. We've got great video classes with people that you've mentioned over the course of this podcast. Jake from Westbound and Down, teaching a video course on brewing West Coast IPA. We've got we've obviously got Kevin Davey on the class that's out now on brewing cold IPA. We have one up and coming with Ben Edmonds, in fact, on building excellence in the brew house. Hasn't been released yet. You're hearing about it right now, first place right here. But you want to be a subscriber and hear about
hot news.
I know. Hear about Ben's approach to building excellence in a brewing program. Obviously, I've talked to Sam from Von Ebert several times on the podcast. Absolutely brilliant. Just kind of excited about Von Ebert and those folks taking over the Ecliptic spot and keeping that going. And
big moves. He's decommissioning and getting ready to move his brand new brew house into that space too. So big times for that whole team. It's very exciting.
Anyway, lots of ways to explore and follow all of the conversations and all of the other rabbit holes that we have started to put you on through the course of this conversation just by subscribing to Craft Beer and Brewing. Natalie, if people want to learn more about Wayfinder and the beers that you're making at Wayfinder, where do they taste them or experience them or find out more about them in the digital space and in the real life?
Yeah, so you can find us at wayfinder.beer and on Instagram at wayfinderbeer. And we distribute in California, Oregon, Washington, and through Crooked Stave in Colorado.
I can get your beer at my local grocery store. It felt like such a treat when I saw that on the shelves. Anyway, thanks for talking to me about brewing. It's been a real pleasure to dig into your brewing mind.
I forgot Arizona.
Arizona too.
I didn't forget Arizona. You're important. You can just also find it there.
Well, all right. Great talking with you. Cheers.
Thanks.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.